Galw'r aelodau.
I call members to order. I have accepted an emergency question understanding order 12.67 and I call on Mick Antonev to ask the emergency question. Mick Antonev.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the implications for Wales of bespoke border arrangements for Northern Ireland?
Well, we can't allow different parts of the UK to be more favourably treated than others. If one part of the UK is granted continued participation in the single market and customs union, then we fully expect to be made the same offer. Things seem to have moved on, though, where the UK government was clearly looking to do a deal with the EU yesterday. That deal was torpedoed by the DUP, which asks the question why it is that a small party in Northern Ireland has the ability to have a veto over what is good for the UK in terms of negotiations with the EU. That is not, my colleague from behind says that is not strong and stable. I agree entirely with him. But really the question is this, is the Prime Minister really in charge of the UK, or is the UK in the charge of 10 MPs from Northern Ireland?
Well, thank you for that answer, First Minister. You might, like me, have been under the misapprehension that we were living in a parliamentary democracy, that Parliament was there to represent all the interests of all the parts of the United Kingdom. And we now find, First Minister, that it is apparently being run and dictated to by just 10 people who have strong right-wing and homophobic views, historic links to terrorism, and are opposed even to the majority decision of the people of, of Northern Ireland in respect of the European Union. So when the people of Wales were encouraged to leave the European Union because it would make Parliament sovereign again, do you think this is what they had in mind?
Well, no is the answer. I don't think they had in mind a scenario where first of all, the UK government to be shaken down for £1.67 billion, and secondly, the UK government was not able to negotiate with the European Union because of a veto held by a small number of members of Parliament. I don't think that's at all what people had in mind when they voted last year.
Mark Isherwood.
Clearly, as successive Welsh governments know, working in coalitions, which you are a de facto head of, and we've had two previous Welsh governments in coalition, that is the reality of coalition government. But last night, the Taoiseach said, we don't want a border in the Irish Sea. At lunchtime today, David Davis stated in the House of Commons, we're now close to concluding the first phase of negotiations and bringing forward trade negotiations. The government does not want a hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland. The UK government recognises the integrity of the EU single market, but also of UK borders, and that we will not be treating any part of the UK differently. He also noted that Labour Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell has said that staying in the single market would be interpreted as not respecting the referendum. Noting, therefore, that last week Bertie Ahern, the former Taoiseach of the Republic of Ireland, stated that technology would be a partial solution to managing movements across the Irish border after Brexit. And a number of times you've raised this disparagingly. What research has your government actually undertaken at the technologies being applied in many parts of the world which are managing goods transporting across borders on precisely this basis?
I'm not sure it's our responsibility to do that, quite frankly. And the UK government has said consistently that it's exploring the technology. In other words, it has no idea what technology might be used. Can I say to the member that there is one example of an entity that is outside the customs union having a border with an entity within the customs union, and that is Gibraltar. And that border is very, very hard. It's far from being a soft border. And really, you seem to be reading out the statement that you should have delivered yesterday afternoon, and that is that the UK government is close to a deal with the EU. Well, that clearly isn't the case after we saw the collapse of the negotiations last night. I'm surprised to hear the DUP are actually in a coalition with the Conservative government. I wasn't aware that they were actually in coalition, had ministers in a coalition. But isn't the point this? That the UK government has a responsibility to secure a deal that is good for the whole of the UK. It is quite clear yesterday, that they were looking to arrange a special deal or special status for Northern Ireland. That was where the UK government was yesterday lunchtime. Arlene Foster picks up the phone and says, Theresa, sorry, we're not going to allow you to do this, and Theresa May then capitulates. Is there not a danger here that the whole of the UK and its interests will be made subject to the views of the largest party in Northern Ireland, true, but not a party that represents the majority of people in Northern Ireland? Can the member not see there are dangers in that?
Prif Weinidog.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Llywydd. We've seen over the past 24 hours the prospect of one part of the UK getting a unique deal, and I reiterate that we in Plaid Cymru want Wales too to be able to benefit from any kind of distinct or special arrangements that would allow us also to be in the single market and the customs union. Now, nobody in their right minds would want to see a hard border on Ireland. I know the First Minister agrees with me on that, but shifting a hard border eastwards is not a solution that would work for Wales, and certainly not for my constituents and the port of Holyhead. Mae'n obligiadau.
There are very grave implications for my own constituency and the 1,000 people working either directly or indirectly in the port of Holyhead in seeing a hard border at Holyhead. Holyhead, the second most busy port in Britain in terms of ferries transporting goods. Now, trade is entirely reliant on the free flow of goods, and trade will seek simpler and easier routes. There are already evidence of taking goods from the European continent to Holyhead. Now, we have to consider all options. We would favour remaining in the single market. What consideration is given, if we can't achieve that, in creating a free trade area in Holyhead or in Anglesey as a whole, or in other port areas in Wales as a way forward? Now, I want an assurance that this government will be looking at all options, including that one. And can I also ask for an assurance that the fate of our ports will be central now in the work of the Welsh Government in persuading the UK Government to show that they are giving any consideration at all to our interests as a nation, because at the moment I see no evidence at all of that?
Well, a great deal of what the member has said is correct. 70% of the trade between Great Britain and the island of Ireland goes through the Welsh ports. And the only thing, anything that stops that or is a barrier to that is something which will cost Holyhead, Pembroke Dock and Fishguard a great deal in jobs and in trade. What is the answer? Well, it's quite clear. The United Kingdom should remain within the single market and also in the customs union. So we wouldn't want any kind of borders regards trading between Britain and Ireland, or between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. That is the answer. And of course, we've been telling the United Kingdom government that you don't have to interpret last year's result as a result of having the hardest Brexit possible. It is quite possible to leave the European Union in a way which doesn't endanger jobs in Wales, and that we can work within the single market and be part of the customs union.
And to the fiasco of the weekend is that Theresa May isn't terribly good at politics, which we knew anyway from the last general election result. It would be inconceivable for the DUP ever to countenance the kind of deal which we read about, whereby there would be a special deal for Northern Ireland on trade, because that would compromise the integrity of the United Kingdom, which is the main purpose of the DUP's existence. So that was never a runner. 85% of Northern Ireland's trade with the British Isles as a whole is done with the United Kingdom, not with the Irish Republic. So it's not even in Ireland's economic interest to have the kind of deal which the EU would want. But I think the other lesson we draw from the events of the weekend is that a handful of Northern Irish MPs have far more influence with the British government than the Welsh government has. And I think that that's an indictment of the Welsh government rather than the DUP.
You know, the Conservative Party and the weakness of the Prime Minister. I mean, it is worrying to hear the leader of UKIP say, well, the Prime Minister isn't terribly good at politics. That perhaps is not the strongest attribute that somebody might have when they are, in fact, the Prime Minister. There are two options here, they're not. Either, first of all, the DUP weren't asked their views and then made their views very, very clear, or they were asked their views and went back on some kind of agreement with the UK government. There are no other options available here. Either way, it's a sign of mismanagement by the UK government of the situation. I thought what was being proposed yesterday was something that was interesting in terms of a solution. Nobody wants to have a hard border. It's impossible to have a hard border, actually, on that island. I know that area well. It's impossible. It can't be done. And I thought there were ways of looking for a solution. But what we now seem to have is there is a veto on the part of one party that represents roughly 37-38% of the population in Northern Ireland in terms of what the future might hold. and that surely is not a situation that is sustainable as far as the future is concerned. And I would expect the UK government to have dealt with this with the DUP beforehand in order to gain the DUP support. It seems to me that either that didn't happen or it did happen and the DUP changed their minds. What other option could there be?
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog.
Thank you, First Minister's questions to the First Minister now as agendaed, and the first question is from Darren Miller.
Will the First Minister confirm the process for addressing complaints regarding the First Minister's adherence to the Ministerial Code?
Yes, any complaints regarding adherence to the Ministerial Code should be submitted to me as First Minister.
As you'll be aware from our exchange, First Minister, last week, I hope to provide evidence to the independent investigator looking at the allegations of bullying in the Welsh Government. What assurances can you provide to this Assembly, Carl Sargent's family and others that any AM with information will be able to contribute without fear of reprisals, and that the collective responsibility which usually binds members of the Welsh Government will be waived for the purposes of all of the investigations which you have announced?
Well, all members can provide such evidence as they think they have. It's a matter ultimately, of course, for the advisor to decide how the process is then taken forward.
Adam Price.
Section 2.9 of the Ministerial Code states that responsibility for special advisers rests with the First Minister and the First Minister alone, and that's been reflected in the First Minister's entry in the list of ministerial responsibilities, where there's an explicit reference to special advisers. That has been the case up until the amended version of ministerial responsibilities, which now, under the First Minister's entry, omits that reference to special advisers. Why is that, First Minister? Are you trying to conceal or evade your responsibilities? No, of course not. That's nonsense. It's to do with this situation with senior civil servants. I'm not responsible for senior civil servants or any other part of the... Sorry, it's not senior civil servants, it's those who are not senior civil servants. I'm not responsible for the civil service. I appoint special advisers. The line manager of special advisers is somebody different in terms of their pay and conditions, but I appoint them, and that will remain the case in the future.
Neil McAvoy.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, you finally referred yourself for an investigation under the Ministerial Code. I've been asking you to do so for months on 3 separate occasions where I believe you misled this Senedd. You've either ignored the calls or just smeared me instead. Now, the Ministerial Code is clear. If you knowingly mislead the Assembly, you will be expected to tender your resignation. If you are found to have misled this Assembly, will you resign? And will you now refer yourself for an investigation under the Ministerial Code on the other matters that I've raised previously?
No, it's not the member. It's just frivolous nonsense, as well as he knows it, and without any basis in fact at all. The advisor is there. I have said that I'll refer myself to the advisor in terms of a suggested breach of the Ministerial Code, and that's exactly what will happen.
What about the lobbyists?
Question 2, David Melding.
Question 2, David Melding.
To make a statement on teacher recruitment in South Wales Central.
Yes, we want teaching in Wales to be a first-choice profession so we can attract the very best. In addition to our incentives, we are working with the sector, including the regional consortia, to actively promote the profession, to recruit the very best and brightest individuals into teaching.
First Minister, I'm pleased to say that in the South Wales Central region there were 2 Gold Award winners and a Silver Award winner in the Pearson Teaching Awards that were announced in October. These are very prestigious awards, as you know. However, despite these outstanding examples of best practice, recent Welsh Government figures have shown that since 2007, the number of job adverts across Wales for teachers has risen by 9.4%, while the number of applications has dropped by nearly 19%. Do you believe the Welsh Government has got a role to play in highlighting what a rewarding profession teaching is and how much best practice there is in some of our schools?
Yes, I do. And just to give the member some idea of what we've been doing, we've been working with regional consortia to actively promote a recruitment and retention offer to support recruitment to ITE in Wales. There's £20,000 available to graduates of the first or a postgraduate degree undertaking secondary postgraduate ITE programmes in maths, Welsh, computer science, physics and chemistry. There's £15,000 available for those who are modern language students who fit the same criteria. And in Wales, we have seen a 3.9% increase in UCAS applications for Wales IT providers in 2016 compared to 2015. So that is encouraging news and shows that the incentives that I've mentioned, along with the other things that we are doing, are proving to be attractive to potential teachers.
Leanne Wood.
Diolch, Llywydd. You'll be aware of the debate about supply teachers, and some of our most experienced teachers are earning poor wages because of the situation whereby agencies take a large chunk of the pay available to them from schools. In Denmark, it's against the law to make a profit out of education, First Minister. Legislation like that here would solve the problem with regards to supply teachers. As a matter of principle, would you be open to such legislation here in Wales?
I think that goes a step perhaps too far. What I am interested in is what we can do when paying conditions are devolved, which has been the problem for us, how we can then improve the conditions of supply teachers as well. In the meantime, I know the Cabinet Secretary on the 24th of October, announced in plenary £2.7 million to support a school-based supply cluster arrangement. That'll see recently qualified teachers who might otherwise find themselves in supply roles employed in maintained schools on a supernumerary basis and paid against national pay rates. But yes, it is right to say that when we see paying conditions devolve, there will be then the opportunity to look again at whether the current arrangements for supply teaching are adequate.
Gareth Bennett.
Diolch, Llywydd. There have been problems with the retention of teaching assistants or TAs. Often TAs qualify as higher level TAs but find that they aren't given the salary or responsibilities appropriate to their new level. This has contributed to many leaving the profession. What steps can the Welsh Government take to address this problem?
Well, it's a matter, of course, for schools in terms of what they do. Local management of schools means that schools have a certain degree of autonomy in terms of how they employ people, but it is clearly in the interest of schools to ensure that they provide the right terms and conditions in order to retain the teaching assistants that they need.
Rhiannon Passmore.
First Minister, the Education Cabinet Secretary recommitted in the Chamber on the 24th of October the Welsh Government's mission to promote teaching in Wales as a high-status, valued and flexible profession. And I know personally, as a former teacher and visiting lecturer, how demanding and challenging, as well as exciting and satisfying, the teaching profession can be. First Minister, the Welsh Labour Government has announced, as you said, support of £2.7 million across the current and next academic years to fund 15 local authorities in supporting school-based supply cluster arrangements across 86 schools and in times of austerity. That will enable the appointment of approximately 50 recently qualified teachers on a supernumerary basis to work across school clusters, covering for teacher absence and ensuring a high level of localised teaching. In addition, savings will be realised from school supply budgets. First Minister, how then will the Welsh Government measure the success of this highly innovative approach, and what possibility will there be for its rollout to cover my constituency in Islwyn so the benefits are felt by all schools in the Gwent Valleys?
Can I thank the member for her question and the passionate way in which she represents her constituency and the people who live in it. I can say to her the response from schools and local authorities involved in the £2.7 million supply cluster project, has been extremely positive. Arrangements are in place to closely monitor and evaluate the initiative, including commissioning a formal research project to evidence the benefits of the pilot as a catalyst and to look at viable future alternative supply models.
Cwestiynau nawr gan yr
Questions now from the party leaders. Leader of the UKIP group, Neil Hamilton.
On the 13th of November, Adam Price tabled a written question which asked the First Minister if he continues to be responsible for, quote, staffing, including the terms and conditions of special advisers. The answer came 10 days later. I retain a close interest in staffing, but responsibility rests with the Permanent Secretary. But the Code of Conduct for Special Advisers says something which is diametrically the opposite of that. The responsibility for the management and conduct of special advisers, including discipline, rests with the First Minister, who made the appointment. So how does the First Minister reconcile what that said on paper with what he's just told Adam Price?
I'm not responsible for the civil service in any way, shape or form. I am responsible for special advisers and for their appointment. In terms of their pay and conditions as a line manager, that's the responsibility of somebody else. Conduct, yes, I am responsible for the conduct of special advisers.
Good. In which case, can the First Minister then confirm that the inquiry which is being undertaken, one of many, another day, another inquiry today, which is being undertaken by James Hamilton, will involve also an inquiry into the conduct of special advisers, because they are specifically responsible to him, the First Minister, ultimately, for their political conduct.
No, the inquiry will look at whether I have breached the ministerial code in relation to the answers I gave in November 2014 and November 2017.
So is the First Minister saying that the conduct of special advisers will not be part of the terms of inquiry of James Hamilton?
Well, I've referred myself under the ministerial code to the adviser. It'll be a matter for the independent adviser to decide how then to take the inquiry forward.
Arweinydd Plaid Cymru.
Plaid Cymru leader Leanne Wood.
Mr Minister, as you said earlier, the Democratic Unionist Party torpedoed the UK's attempt to move on to the next stage in the Brexit talks, and the border in Ireland is the sticking point. Now, none of us want a return to a hard border, but neither do we want to see barriers between Wales and our nearest neighbours. Barriers will be bad news for the port of Holyhead, as we've heard earlier, to Stena to Irish ferries, to jobs, and bad news for other Welsh ports as well. There'll be delays to business, and gridlock for passengers is the risk. We all know how much influence the DUP has. What influence can you use to protect the port of Holyhead from a new hard border?
Well, we have spoken to the Irish Government about this and informed them, of course, of our concerns, and they share our concerns. The last thing they want to see is a hard border between Wales and Ireland as a maritime border, and we are working with them in order to ensure that doesn't happen.
First Minister, I use the word influence on purpose. The Welsh national interest can only be protected if our MPs vote the right way on crucial Brexit divisions. Plaid Cymru's solution to the border problem, as you'll be aware, is for the UK to stay in the customs union. The UK Labour Party is supposed to be the official opposition in Westminster. You've just said earlier on that you want Wales to remain in the single market and that membership of the customs union is the solution to this problem. We heard earlier also about the importance of parliamentary democracy. Can you tell us, therefore, why Labour MPs voted against the UK membership of the customs union as recently as November the 20th?
Well, I have to first of all, it is gratifying to see that Labour and Plaid Cymru MPs have worked together in order to make sure that we look to try and get amendments through the Commons and the Lords, which I very much welcome. She will know my view, and that is that I believe we should have full and unfettered access to the single market. We've agreed the same position. I also believe that the UK is best served by staying within the customs union. There will be different views in my party in London as to, and you know, those views are well known, apart as some members have put them. But my view is, as First Minister, that we are best served by staying in the customs union and having that access to the single market.
The problem here is that we have a number of Labour views. We don't have clarity as to what the Labour position is. And there has been a failure by Labour MPs to protect our interests here in Wales by the way that they vote. We're facing a weak and divided Tory government, but a consensus has been allowed to be built over leaving the single market and the customs union. Now, you've said that if a distinct deal is offered to another UK country, you expect that to be offered to Wales. Now, perhaps I trust Westminster a lot less than you do, First Minister. But as things stand, I expect Westminster not to offer us such a deal. But we can change that situation if we want to. In the absence of any action or initiative from the UK Labour Party, this Assembly can speak out. You have the power to ensure that Wales doesn't settle for second best here. As First Minister of this country, will you ensure that when the time comes, Labour MPs in Westminster will back a distinct deal for Wales?
Well, I think that they've shown that with their actions last night, in fairness. It's not as if that they haven't been supportive of the amendments that we have put down. Look, the perspective I have is this. I want to see a good deal for the whole UK. I think that's by far the easiest solution. Having a deal specifically for Wales is more difficult. There's no question about that. It's more difficult. It's not impossible. It's certainly more difficult. I would like to see the UK as a whole remain in the customs union, have full and unfettered access to the single market, and that means, of course, that Welsh businesses will be able to access the UK market, which is hugely important for them, and the EU market at the same time. I don't see that there needs to be any kind of competition between those two aims.
Arweinydd yr wrth blaen.
Leader of the Opposition, Andrew R.T. Davis.
Officer, First Minister, did Leighton Andrews make a complaint of any nature in 2014 about the conduct or behaviour of members of staff in the Welsh Government or your office?
No.
First Minister, why have you subsequently then, when we've been questioning you in this chamber, indicated that you had issues brought to your attention by the individual I named and others, and you dealt with those issues at that time? Because there's quite clearly two stories running here, and it is difficult for the impartial observer to actually try and get to the truth of what people want to hear, which is what was actually going on in 2014 and what action was taken by you. So can you clear up who is telling the truth, Leighton Andrews or yourself?
I'll just answer your question. There were no allegations of bullying.
So you're saying that in the answers you gave this chamber over the last several weeks, where you identified, and this was your words, issues were addressed and actions were taken, that those issues were not related to behaviour of the nature that has been described by Leighton Andrews, by the Special Advisor, or by other individuals who have gone to the press indicating such an atmosphere existed on the 5th floor, and that was brought to your attention, and you did say in this chamber that you did take action. So what action did you take, and what were the issues you are referring to in your previous answers?
Issues that did not involve bullying. I've said that no allegation was made by Leighton Andrews to me in regard to bullying. Were there issues that arose? Yes, there would be conflicts now and again between people, disputes about the titles of bills, for example. There will be issues. When you have a talented team of people, sometimes they will rub up against each other. And let me just make one thing clear. The narrative, the political narrative he's trying to create is that somehow the government, he's not, is he? That somehow in 2014 the government is in chaos and has been ever since. We delivered on all our manifesto promises between 2011 and 2016. We got back into power in 2016. The people of Wales trusted us to do that. Far from being ineffective, far from being a government where people constantly spent their time arguing with each other, we were a government that delivered for the people of Wales and delivered our manifesto as we promised.
Question 3.
Question 3, Rhina Bjorwerth. Will the First Minister provide an update on Welsh Government roundtable discussions on leaving the European Union?
The Cabinet Secretary for Energy, Planning and Rural Affairs chairs the Brexit Roundtable for her portfolio. It has met on a regular basis since July 2016, and the Welsh Government also engages with stakeholders across all policy areas on EU transition through established forums.
Thank you. In the context of what we've been discussing this afternoon, that the government at every level is involved in all ways possible in terms of defending Wales's interests. I know in the External Affairs and Additional Legislation Committee of the Assembly on the 20th of November, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance mentioned the round table arrangements for the Minister for Agriculture. He talked about the working party of the Education, Cabinet Secretary on Education. He talked about a group chaired by the Cabinet Secretary for the Economy, and that's another area that will be very sensitive to departure from the European Union, will be health and social care. In staffing, we will have to push for visas in order to attract staff to work in Wales specifically. There are concerns as a result of losing the European Medicines Agency in terms of how Wales can make bilateral agreements with a new agency in Europe in order to continue to test medicines in Wales. So there's a broad range of areas that will need to be addressed. So can you tell us what work the Health Secretary is doing in leading a team on Brexit? Because there is concern within the health sector in Wales that this is one area which is being neglected somewhat at the moment. We simply can't afford that to happen.
Well, we are working extremely closely at the moment with health and social care organisations in order to understand the impact of Brexit, and so that they can also understand the impact on themselves and how we can discuss that. Since the referendum itself, the government has been working with health and care organisations in order to consider which parts will be impacted by Brexit, and also workshops have been held between the UK government and Welsh government to consider the legal and executive impact of Brexit as regards a number of issues. So a number of things have taken place in order to ensure that the health service can consider which problems and what problems can arise because of Brexit, especially hard Brexit.
Kishwood.
Thank you very much. In his letter yesterday to the External Affairs and Additional Legislation Committee, the UK Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Exiting the European Union said the Secretary of State for Exiting the European Union has held numerous discussions with the Welsh Government, including a number of bilateral discussions with the Cabinet Secretary of Finance and Local Government, but there's agreement between the Scottish, Welsh and UK governments that common frameworks will be necessary in some areas, and we've together agreed a set of principles that will underpin our work, and that we've agreed a programme of intense discussions with the Welsh Government, led by the First Secretary of State, to take this forward. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that programme of discussions is and how you'll be informing this Assembly about the developments that arise from them?
Well, the discussions are not with the Secretary of State particularly but for Wales, but with the Secretary of State for the different Secretaries of State who have portfolio responsibilities in Whitehall. They are called deep dives for reasons which escape me actually. But what they are looking to do is to see where there is a need, first of all, is there a need for a common framework? Secondly, what should that common framework look like? But key to this all, of course, is that any common framework in any area must be agreed and not imposed by the UK Government.
Cwestiwn 4.
Question 4, Angela Burns.
Presiding Officer. Good afternoon, First Minister. Will you make a statement on plans to promote openness and transparency within the Welsh Government?
We're committed to maximising transparency and openness through our publication scheme.
Thank you, First Minister. As you will be aware, the last few months have seen some pretty torrid times in politics, and I think the esteem in which we are held is suffering. And I think the Welsh public will expect us to be far more open and transparent going forward. I have recently received an answer to a written question from the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Wellbeing, which contradicts an almost identical question tabled by my colleague David Melding less than 2 months earlier. What can you do to ensure that your government is providing consistent information to questions tabled by Assembly members? It is merely our attempts to conduct proper scrutiny, which is our duty on behalf of the public, for whom we are the elected representatives.
Well, the member has me at a disadvantage. I don't know what the questions were or what the answers were, but if she provides me with those questions, I will, of course, investigate.
Simon Thomas.
Diolch, Llywydd.
Thank you, Llywydd. And as we seek the most transparent solution possible on some of the issues that are most important to the Assembly today, I return to the question asked by Andrew R.T. Davies, because when you responded to Andrew R.T. Davies, you said very clearly that you weren't dealing with any accusations of bullying, but a far broader question was actually asked of you. So may I ask that question again? Did you receive any complaint or comment by Leighton Andrews around April 2014, October 2014, which related to behaviour, not just bullying, but the behaviour of any member of your staff or government? And in dealing with such a comment or complaint from Leighton Andrews, did you promise him that someone would look into those comments?
Well, things are shifting now. There were complaints made by everybody on occasion. Some people saying, I'm not being listened to, I'm not happy with this, and that's quite natural. And he is familiar with this as one who was a special advisor in the previous government. And there was a great deal of discussion within the government about some of the problems that were arising. People were saying, well, this should happen or that should rather happen. That's quite a natural process in the way a government is run. And how do you judge a government by their actions? And was there any kind of allegation? Because that is the original question. Was there any kind of allegation of bullying from Leighton Andrews? The answer is no.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, you're now investigating a potential leak after it was alleged that many people knew about your cabinet reshuffle before it's happened. It also seems that there are many people here who know who the complainants are against Carl Sargent and the nature of the complaints. They can't be raised here because of data protection laws. By Friday, on the Monday of the week in question, you said you had no complaints of harassment against your AMs. By Friday, you said that you had 3. So I'd like you to state on the record whether or not you're aware of those complaints being coordinated in any way.
That's a remarkable suggestion, I have to say. I hope he has evidence for that. First of all, I'm not sure what he's talking about on the Monday. He's not clear about that. If he is saying that if it wasn't for data protection, he would out complainants, then he needs to take a long, serious, hard look at his own character.
Question 5.
Question 5, Steffan Lewis.
Statement on the future of perinatal mental health services in Wales.
Yes, the Welsh Government is committed to supporting mental well-being before, during and after pregnancy, as well as developing community perinatal mental health teams across Wales since 2014. We have committed to providing inpatient care in Wales as part of the draft budget agreement.
I thank the First Minister for the answer. As he mentioned, because of the agreement between Plaid Cymru and the Welsh Government, there will be a return of inpatient perinatal mental health services in this country. It was expected, though, that by now WISC would have come back with a report on how inpatient perinatal mental health services could be delivered. I wonder if he could outline the reasons for this delay and perhaps could elaborate on what timeline he expects to be followed in the new year.
Well, we have invested since 2015 to 16 an additional £1.5 million each year to provide a community mental health service within every health board in Wales. Each health board now has a community service in place with more than 2,300 women being seen across Wales since the start of last year. Those new teams do help to improve perinatal mental health outcomes for new mothers as well as their babies and families. We have also committed to providing specialist inpatient care in Wales within the draft budget for 2018 to 19 and 2019 to 20. And the All-Wales Steering Group on Perinatal Mental Health has been asked to draw up options for inpatient care in Wales by the end of January.
Given that up to 1 in 5 women are affected by perinatal mental illness, the view of the Royal College of Psychiatrists have stated that there has always been a shortfall of perinatal mental health services in Wales, and that is a worry. The recent report of the Children, Young People and Education Committee, published in October, noted that the Betsy board had still not filled the majority of posts within their new perinatal mental health service teams, despite funding having been provided to them for that. And that was the same month that you actually took them into special measures. Can you now confirm, First Minister, whether after 30 months of your government's intervention, this board has now completed recruitment to this service and that it is now fully operational?
Well, the evidence base suggested there wouldn't be sufficient demand to provide a unit in North Wales alone. WISC, it's right to say, was asked to work with Betsy Cadwaladr University Health Board to consider options in the north of Wales, and the Cabinet Secretary has committed to establish a clinician-led managed clinical network to help drive forward improvements to perinatal mental health services in Wales.
Caroline Jones.
First Minister, like all mental health services, perinatal mental health services in Wales are facing the twofold pressure of increased demand and staff shortages. In evidence to the Children, Young People and Education Committee, nearly all local health boards highlighted the fact that lack of sufficient clinical psychologists is impacting their ability to provide a comprehensive service to new mothers. First Minister, can you outline the steps your government is taking to increase the numbers of clinical psychologists in Wales?
Well, I think I've answered the question in terms of the money that we have put forward. I can say that with the establishment of community teams across Wales, we're well placed to recognise severe postpartum mental ill health. The consensus is there's now sufficient demand to re-establish specialist inpatient care in the south of Wales, and I know that last week the Cabinet Secretary wrote to the Children, Young People and Education Committee in response to its recent inquiry into perinatal mental health in Wales.
Question 6.
Question 6, Joyce Watson.
Howard, will the First Minister make a statement in response to the announcement that wholesaler Palmer & Harvey has gone into administration?
Well, I've been made aware that wholesaler Palmer & Harvey has gone into administration. For any business in Wales impacted by the announcement, guidance and support is available through the Business Wales service.
Thank you. I was contacted last week by a constituent who was extremely concerned about the impact that will have on their small family-owned business. and Palmer & Harvey is the main supplier, and it is the case for hundreds of convenience stores in rural areas. And I was informed by the constituent that Palmer & Harvey customers do have accounts with agreed terms that allow shops to pay either monthly or fortnightly. So even if an alternative supplier does have the stock to supply affected businesses, they're concerned that it could take time to put in place necessary financial and licence checks to allow new accounts to be opened, certainly this side of Christmas. So it is the case that the only option available to businesses would be cash purchases, and many of those won't be in that position. So my constituents do fear that the cash and carries local to them will simply not, in the short term, be able to set up delivery schedules and services to meet their needs and, in turn, the needs of those local constituents. So, First Minister, is it possible in any way for the Welsh Government to make inquiries and give what assurances they can to affected businesses and individuals in Mid and West Wales and elsewhere at this time?
Well, I can say that Business Wales is available to provide information, guidance and support to any business impacted by the announcement, and I would encourage them to make contact. Business Wales does advises support businesses on all aspects of their operation, including evaluating their supply chains to identify alternative suppliers, which includes Welsh companies, and supporting the development of local supply chains and clusters so that more economic value and employment is retained locally, will be part of the new regionally focused model of economic development, which we will set out in the Economic Action Plan.
Russell George.
First Minister, 10,000 firms went out of business last year in Wales. The number of firms still in business after 5 years is just 43%, which is below the UK average. Now, understandably, some firms will go out of business due to changes in the market and for other reasons. But can I ask what your explanation is to why businesses are more likely to go out of business in Wales? And can I also ask how the government is addressing this trend?
Well, in terms of why businesses in Wales, some businesses fail, we know that that will happen from time to time, unfortunately. The latest phase of Business Wales aims to create 10,000 new businesses, 28,300 new jobs, and provide support to help inspire the next generation. And that service provides support right across Wales for aspiring entrepreneurs, startups and existing micro-businesses and SMEs, including social enterprises.
Question 7, Lynn.
Question 7, Lynn Eagle.
First Minister, provide an update on the impact of universal credit in Torfaen.
Well, I'm extremely concerned about the time claimants are waiting for their first payment and the fact that many of our most vulnerable people in Torfaen and elsewhere are struggling to deal with the complexities of universal credit, and we have called on the UK Government to halt the rollout.
Thank you, First Minister. As you highlighted, in July, Torfaen became the second part of Wales to go live with the full-service operation of universal credit. And after just 2 months, our main housing provider, Bronavon, had recorded £27,000 worth of arrears, with 300 tenants in arrears. Torfaen CAB is monitoring closely the impact locally, which has, as you've alluded to, included delays and difficulties accessing payments and particular problems for young people. Now, in Torfaen, we are fortunate in that the local authority, CAB and housing providers are all working together in partnership to support people through these difficulties. But with the UK Government intent on continuing with this ill-conceived rollout of universal credit, it is going to be essential that similar arrangements are put in place throughout Wales. What more can the Welsh Government do to ensure that there is that planning in place across Wales to ensure that all communities are supported through this process?
Well, the Minister has written to the Minister of Employment requesting more details in relation to the UK autumn budget changes, particularly where universal claimants are in respect of housing costs, to understand how the new support arrangements will work for claimants in relation to the universal credit. The Minister is also seeking reassurance that the DWP will be able to offer financial support to universal credit claimants over the Christmas period. As far as we're concerned, there is £5.97 million of grant funding in place this year to provide advice on social welfare issues delivered through 3 projects.
First Minister, you say you support the principle of universal credit, and the aim of universal credit and the UK Government's wider welfare reforms is to help people get in and stay in work. Given that unemployment in Torfaen is historically low and has fallen further in the past year, isn't that something you should be supporting constructively and trying to work with the UK government?
Well, it doesn't work. That's the problem. I mean, regardless of what the principle is, it clearly doesn't work. There'll be people left high and dry without any money. We know that it's a mess. We know that are members of his own party, well, I don't know if he is a member of the Conservative Party or not, but there are members who sit in the same party on that side in Westminster who have made the same points to the UK government. The point is that this is a mess that the UK government's making and ordinary people are suffering.
Question 8, David.
Question 8, David Reid.
Has the First Minister sought legal advice on the covenant that exists on land in Baglan Industrial Park, on which the Ministry of Justice wishes to build a new prison?
Well, as the member will be aware, this question relates to legal information that's privileged, so I can't respond to him on that point.
First Minister, I asked your Counsel General the same type of question about a fortnight ago, and I got a typical lawyer's answer, or perhaps a typical Counsel General's answer. My constituents want clarity, and there's a debate tomorrow afternoon in this chamber about that prison, and they're seeking that clarity, particularly on the Welsh Government's views on its responsibilities under the Covenant. Can the First Minister reassure my constituents that the Welsh Government has no plans to change the Covenant and will seek to abide by its principles of keeping the use of the land for industrial purposes and to avoid nuisance for neighbours, which would mean telling the MOJ no when they wish to purchase or lease the land for the development of a prison, which in my books does not come under an industrial development?
Well, what I can say to the member is this. The Ministry of Justice have not asked the Welsh Government to sell them the land at the Baglan site, and no decision on the future of the site has been made. I can say that a letter was written by Carl Sargent to David Liddington, Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for Justice on the 26th of October 2017. That letter sought confirmation whether it's still the intention that the proposed prison at Baglan would be a Category C establishment, or whether there are plans to house other prisoners in the proposed prison. In addition, the letter requested confirmation of the effect that a new prison in South Wales would have on the prisons at Cardiff and Swansea. We have not received a response to that letter, and there will be no further action from the Welsh Government until that response is forthcoming.
Susie Davis.
That's a very interesting answer, First Minister. I think, however, you are possibly able to tell us, as it's a matter of public record, which parties would be entitled to enforce the covenant that's in the documentation at the moment. Are you able to tell us as well how many expressions of interest have been made in that land during the period of Welsh Government ownership and which have been put off by the existence of the covenant?
It's very difficult to give a view on whether an expression of interest has been put off, because, of course, you wouldn't know about the expression of interest in the first place. What I can say is that it's the Ministry of Justice, which her party, of course, are responsible for, who want to build on this land. From our perspective, we are quite clear that until and unless we get the clarification that we wish to have, we will take no further steps in relation to this land. We will examine very carefully whether this land is, in fact, the right place for a prison to go.
Bethan Jenkins.
Legal advice I've received, and I quote, says, assuming this is correct, there is a covenant and that covenant is legally valid. It means that the site is affected by an obligation in favour of a third party limiting its use to an industrial park only. In those circumstances, building a prison on the site could be a breach of the covenant. In the event of a breach, the party with the benefit of the covenant could take steps to enforce it, e.g. by seeking an injunction, restraining the development and or claiming compensation. So from this legal advice, which clearly shows there are many tools within the Welsh Government's box to block the proposed prison and force the MOJ into compulsory purchase. The only reason not to do this, as far as I could understand, would be that the Welsh Government wants to have this prison in Baglan. Will you seek a commitment here today that the Welsh Government will oppose releasing this land to the MOJ, so therefore posing the question to the UK Government is no longer necessary in future?
Well, we await a response from the UK Government. Right? I say quite clearly to the member that there will be no action on this point unless there is a satisfactory response to that letter, and even then we will consider whether in fact this land is the right place for a prison.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog.
Thank you, First Minister.
Question.